Hello, good morning, and welcome to another edition of the Legal Zone, where we tackle injustice. My name is Salon Phillips. I'm the host for today. We have with us Dr. Cheney. Good morning, Dr. Cheney.
Good morning.
Mr. John Salati.
Good morning, Salon. Good to be back.
And we have a very special guest that I'm going to introduce in a minute. But before I go into that, we've been having an amazing series of shows this month for Black History. And this is our last of three that we've had for the month of February. The show is the Legal Zone, where we tackle injustice. And we are aware that injustices do not just happen in our home, in our backyard, in our country. We see now where there's international wars going on. And we know that international injustices happen. So we're going to talk about an injustice as it pertains to outside of our country. For bar takers, you don't have to worry about immigration law on the exam. There are no questions about immigration, international law on the bar exam. You can take immigration in law school, but the questions are not going to be on the exam. But it's important to know what happens outside of our country. And immigration law is a thriving area of law when we take immigration cases at our firm. So we're going to be educated today by a lovely lady. Her name is Sophie DeSources. Did I say that last name correctly?
That is fine. We say it in different ways, the source or the sources. I'm fine with that.
Okay. And she is from the country of Haiti. And she is going to educate us on the country and on the injustice that their country as a whole has suffered. Welcome to our show, Miss Sophie.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Salon, for the invitation. I was thrilled to participate in your podcast. I heard very good things about it, and I look forward to a very interesting conversation.
Okay, so tell us about Haiti. We have some people who watch the show that may not even know where Haiti is.
Well, Haiti is first of all, it's an island. It's before being a country. It's an island of two countries located in the central Caribbean Sea, one of the largest islands in the Caribbean. That was colonized by both the Spaniards and the French at their time. And this is a country that has a wealth of history, as it is one of the first Black nations to have taken its independence in 1804, believe it or not, and has paid the price for it until today.
Wow. What's the native language of Haiti?
The native language of Haiti is actually Creole, which is a language, and French. French because of its past history with, at the time, the colonizing power of France. And Creole, which is an interesting language. It's actually a language. It's not a patois. It's not a subset of a language. It is a full-blown language because it ticks off all the indicators of what a language is. It's a mix of French, English, Spanish, a little bit of Portuguese, and African language as well. Because, of course, Haiti was in the midst of the slave trade, and thus picked up a lot of different dialects from different countries, especially from the West and Central African countries. Okay. And we do speak it not only in Haiti, we speak it in Guadeloupe and Martinique, and some countries in the Pacific, such as the Seychelles Islands.
And what island did you say it borders? You said it borders, Haiti borders what country?
Dominican Republic, which is a country that itself was colonized by the Spanish Empire at the time, and thus speaks Spanish.
That's interesting. Okay, so tell us something more about Haiti. It's wide open.
Well, I can start with the history and then we'll start with the injustices. But to frame the discourse, I really want to talk about the injustices, not to Haiti per se, but mostly to the Haitian people. I think it's important to give a face, a humanized picture of to whom those injustices have been targeted at and why. Okay. As stated earlier, Haiti has taken its independence since 1804, and that was led by two very prominent revolutionary figures of the Haitian history, and one named Toussaint Louverture and the other named Dessalines, who were in different social economic spectrum, but understood very clearly, either inspired by the French Revolution of 1789, understood that this was a powerful moment and that as they believe in those very important principle of freedom for all and democracy, why not implement it in the most prosperous colony of France, which was one of the richest colony of France, named the Pearl of the Antilles, Haiti. And so they have gathered into leading a revolution that was a first, not necessarily the first one that came about, but the first one that was successful in really shaking the powers of the imperialistic country at the time, meaning France and especially the Napoleon regime. And so you will see from 1793 to 1810, this beautiful, now declare wonders, the greatest wonders of UNESCO, the Citadel, which was a fortress, a war fortress that was actually erected in order to defend Haiti against its former colonizer and former invaders. And so after Haiti has actually won its independence or its revolution has become successful duly, French powers did menace quite a bit due to the loss of the revenue. The fact that Haitian needed, in order for them not to come back and take what was theirs, to pay the amount of approximately between 20 to $30 billion in today's money, when Haiti actually had to pay this for about 122 years, from 1825 to 1947. That is a hefty price for any young country to pay, period, especially a first Black republic.
And who are they paying it to?
I beg your pardon?
Who are they paying this to?
They paid that to the French powers. Yes, the French government.
This is the Citadel that you spoke about.
That is the Citadel, indeed. So that debt has been repaid for about 122 years. But as completely outstanding as this injustice is, you have to understand that this was a regular practice still in 1965. I mean, Senegal and Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, when they took their independence in the 1960s, also paid a debt to France. It was a modus operandi of not only the time, but as colonial powers withdraw from their colonies, the price to pay to be fully independent.
Wow. Is this Citadel there still today?
Absolutely.
Let me put that back up.
It is a beautiful war fortress construct that is erected at one of the highest mountains of the north of the country. And by the way, for context, Haiti is not its original name. The original name that, well, Haiti is the original name, but the name that the French powers provided Haiti was Saint-Domingue. And that name at the time of the revolution was actually scrapped off and went back to the Taino Native American, Native Indian lingo, which mean island of mountains.
So what's this comparison?
So this is where we're fast forwarding from 1804 now to humanitarian crises, right? I believe many people are very much aware of the January 12, 2010 earthquake that rocked Haiti at of 7.1 Richter scale. That had a devastating impact, killing about almost 300,000 people, amputating.
Was that Hurricane Katrina?
No, that was not Hurricane Katrina.
Which?
That was actually earthquake.
Oh, earthquake. Okay.
That was an earthquake. So going back to the fact that Haiti is an island of mountains, hence the name, it is situated under three fault lines, earthquake fault lines or systemic fault lines. One is in the capital city. The other one is in the south. And a major one is in the north of the country, where actually the Citadel is. Now, the Citadel survived the first earthquake that was very shaky and very important back in the 1900s, but it is expected to have another earthquake as we're past due the 100 years of an earthquake in that region. And actually in 2010, Port-au-Prince, the capital city of the country, actually experienced an earthquake, a devastating earthquake of 7.1, 7.2 Richter scale. Now, that earthquake had an amount of damages, both material and human, and many state that the damages that Haiti actually experienced should not have been that dramatic. And should have been dramatic because, unfortunately, at that time, Haiti, one, was not ready for an earthquake, did not have a risk management or an emergency management toolkit, a FEMA-like agency to actually approach those complex issues. And second, the lack of governance that the country has suffered over the past 30 so years kind of somewhat emphasize the issue of loss of life and loss of material gain. And that is—
You said the lack of government or governance?
Governance, the lack of governance, meaning a past regime coming in power and not fully addressing needs of the population, not fully being a government for the people, but more a government for interested people.
Okay.
And that, of course, compounded with the foreign interests that wanted to, let's say, display the amount of aid. I don't know if any of you recall, there was about $13.5 billion donated on the 2010 earthquake. And the picture that was just shown between 2010 and 2015, you can see there's not much difference, right?
Yeah, let me open
right.
it.
I think it's fairly visible. But when you tell people after, multiple financial controllers in attack and audit place that the US government and foreign allies actually provided $13.5 billion that were collected for the earthquake in 2010, and you show those pictures, they're completely incomprehensible to anyone.
So what you're saying is this is the picture after the earthquake in 2010, immediately after.
Correct.
And then after the funding came, and how much money was it again?
13.5 billion.
This is the pictures after the money.
That is correct.
Wow. So it looks as though the money didn't go towards rebuilding the city.
The money didn't go towards Haiti, period. The money didn't go towards Haiti. And I think that is the disgrace let's say, the international development industry as a whole, to take stock and to take responsibility for the mismanagement of funds. Yes, at the time you can say that there was lack of governance in Haiti, and I addressed it earlier, but 13.5 billions were not given to the Haitian government. 13.5 billion were majorly addressed to large INGOs, large multilateral organizations that have a focus of emergency relief assistance, and development. So that is a very, let's say, troubling account based on the amount of funds that were spent for the recovery. When you compare other countries such as Indonesia that recovered in 2004 from their tsunami, there is a world of difference.
Wow. Okay, go on now. So where did the money go? I mean, I'm still amazed by that.
Everybody is, including Haitians. Where did the money go? That's a very interesting question. The money went back to their original donors. That's where the money went, because
who were the original donors?
The original donors, or the US, multilateral organization, European countries, etc. They went to their organizations. A simple example. When you are donating money to the Red Cross, I know I did, not to name the Red Cross per se, but it is the most patent example of what actually occurred. At the time of the earthquake, you donate money to Haiti, and you're thinking, okay, I've donated $200 to help those poor Haitian people that are that got awakened out of their lives to get out of the shambles and rambles of this earthquake, to the Red Cross, which is an international organization that I know, that I respect, that I absolutely agree on the principle, except that the Red Cross forgot to tell you that the money that you're donating will not necessarily go to Haiti. They have about 120 offices throughout the world, and they will allocate those monies accordingly. So whatever money that during, let's say, January 12, 2010 and March 12, 2010, that were donated to help the relief of the earthquake actually did not go to Haiti. They went to whichever multilateral organization that received that money. And they have the authority or the discretion to disperse the fund as they deem fit.
So, and I guess at that time it made national news where Haiti and the failed promise of the U.S.
Correct.
aid them. Now,
Correct.
what role this article speaks about the Clintons? Do you have any information on that?
I do not. I have not not read that particular article, or perhaps I read it a few years ago. I don't quite remember. The author seems quite known, but the only thing I have to say about that is when the earthquake occurred, we had the idea of international aid, for example, giving out, for example, staple foods such as rice to the country. This is a country that has been producing rice for centuries. And one moment to the other, you actually killed in a second their national economy of rice producers by importing rice from Miami and Alabama to satisfy your local interests. And so in the justification of aid, it can be understood quite objectively for a certain period of time, but that aid cannot be prolonged for more than 6 months, 8 months, a year, killing absolutely the industry of rice farmers in Haiti, where their rice in the market is no longer competitive because the subsidies that rice farmers are having here in the United States, helping export that rice under the demise of aid, actually kills the inside industry in the country. So that is one of the negative effects of aid. And that is why the quick fixes of international aid really need to be rethought, and in a much more sustainable way that they have ever thought. And I personally think, having worked in that industry in the past, Haiti is a wonderful example, no pun intended, as to what not to do when doing aid in a country.
So the U.S. sought to aid Haiti by sending them a product that Haiti was already abundant
producing. Mm-hmm.
Whose idea was that?
Well, it was the idea of the former president who 8 years later did apologize for that. He did recognize that.
Which president was that?
Clinton.
I know, Dr. Cheney, you had some questions.
Okay, how are you?
I'm doing well, thank you, Dr. Cheney. Nice meeting you.
Okay, I'm gonna go a little different, but I want to stay with the earthquake just for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
I was reading some literature in preparation for you today, and there's a book by somebody named Thomas Jackson, 2012. And this kind of surprised me because I went to Haiti. I think it's a beautiful place. I was studying my master's thesis, U.S. occupation, from 1914 to 1948. And I'm seeing that date varies too. So
correct.
Anyway, so I keep up with Haiti a bit. I'm interested in your response to this. This person, Jackson, wrote this book, and he actually covers a book that was written prior to that in the 1800s by somebody named Hassard Pritchard. And he spent some time, he was an explorer. So he went from different places, and he was there in Haiti to serve as a journalist long ago. And it said that he talked about some positives and negatives about Haiti. But one of the things that comes up in your conversation that does not come up in your conversation exactly is that Jackson said, Pritchard said in 1899, Haitians still spoke of the earthquake of 1842 that leveled the town of Cape Haitian. Correct. And that was really news to me. And I went to that area, I guess where the Citadel is, and I couldn't make it on the donkey to go up there. Can you tell us anything about that earthquake?
Sure. So I quickly alluded.
The thing is, was it as devastating as the
yes,
ones?
It was. It was. It was very devastated. It was over 100,000 people died during that earthquake. Then I alluded to very quickly when I say normally the north of the country is due for an earthquake. And actually in 2010, Port-au-Prince had it, which was not expected. It's been more than 100 years since 1842. And so normally Cape Haitian and its surrounding areas, the North, the Department of the North, is forecasted to have that particular very tremendous earthquake because their default line is apparently much more tenuous than the rest of the country. Yet in 2010, Port-au-Prince had it. And in 2021 and 2022, we recently had 2 earthquakes in the south of Haiti.
Okay.
So yes, they were devastating. Yes, Haitian government since the Duvalier regime, which is, as you know, a dictatorship that lasted 30 years, did know about it. Were there any actual steps taken to creating emergency assistance management, risk mitigation agency that would help coordinate in case of an earthquake? Now, as you know, this is an island situated in the middle of the Caribbean, right? So you have floods and hurricane on a yearly basis. And that alone should trigger a kind of, okay, we need something on a regular basis. We need an infrastructure that would able to respond to emergency assistance. Yet that did not click in until 2010. Okay. And still is in development. I can say at this time and moving forward, there is an emergency assistance in Haiti that is called the General Directorate. That is a assemble of professionals specialized on emergency and risk management.
Okay, I have 2 more questions, and I'm going a little different, but you're okay. You can handle this.
Sure.
The Harlem Renaissance and Haiti. Okay?
Ooh.
And I'll just explain what the Harlem Renaissance is, not necessarily for this immediate audience, but for the external audience. The Harlem Renaissance was an intellectual and cultural revival of African American music, dance, art, fashion, literature, theater, and politics centered in Harlem, Manhattan, New York City, spanning from 1920s and 30s, etc. And at that time, it was known as the Negro Movement, named after Alain Locke. Alain Locke, was considered the father of the Harlem Renaissance. And he wrote a book called The New Negro, and it was the year of 1925. And here I go. Dr. Alain Locke, known as the father of the Harlem Renaissance, covered a great deal and included the Harlem Renaissance writers. Many of them admired the efforts of the Haitian Toussaint Louverture, put it that way, and watched with great interest in Haiti, in Haiti's progress as a location, and you can talk about this, in proximity to Cuba and other Caribbean locations are all very important to the United States of America.
Mm-hmm.
So Locke included W. Du Bois, we talked about him on our show, who spent time in Haiti. Maybe you know about that.
Mm-hmm.
His father,
Frederick Douglass.
huh?
No, I said Frederick Douglass as well.
Exactly. His father, Alfred Du Bois, was born in Haiti, we're told.
Correct.
Langston Hughes teamed up with Arna Bontemps. Both spent time in Haiti and wrote children's books, okay? Even though if you look at the works of Langston Hughes, it extends far beyond, and it includes more than just children's books, poetry and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And Zora Neale Hurston was there a great deal. She had a Guggenheim scholarship that enabled her to travel to Haiti and write several books about the Haitian people. Eyes Watching God, Tell My Horse. And she wrote about voodoo. I don't think we've talked about voodoo at all.
No, we have not yet.
Voodoo, Haiti, and the Harlem Renaissance. And I'm asking, my question is, do you think Haitians are aware of the Harlem Renaissance connection?
I think they are. That's not their immediate reference, but I think they are. I think what Haitians, and to go back to your initial introduction of the question of Harlem Renaissance and what it's embedded in Haitian culture and how do Haitian identify per se with things such as art, culture, etc. And when they immigrate in the United States or elsewhere, how they're able to communicate that, or when Black people from elsewhere come to Haiti, how are they able to embrace that? That is a heritage, I would say, that is mostly due to its independence, because it's not a sense of pride, it's a cherished heritage, understanding that, yes, Haiti is the first Black republic, but it was a first Black republic for a reason. And it's because of certain principles that were very well understood at the time by its leaders, such as Toussaint Louverture, that helped it grow in and be as successful as it was, even after the independence. And each time in the Haitian philosophy, or should I say in the Haitian culture, the idea of a Black person standing on their own in a multifaceted way, meaning intellectually, physically, spiritually, is very important. That is very much a mixture of culture and identity that comes from the Tainos, the spiritual side, should I say, from the African as well, the voodoo side, right? And also intellectually, because apparently a lot of Haitian slaves actually were very intelligent, very smart. And learned, like African-American slaves here in the United States, were autodidact. They learned how to read and write from their master's chambers because they were very curious beings. So that sense of not entitlement, but of identity as a Black person was very important, and perhaps cross-pollinated amongst different other Blacks groups, either in the United States or also at the time in France.
Okay, yeah.
I hope that answers your question somewhat.
Mm-hmm. Oh, you did. You did. The other part, the last part I want to talk about, is art and dance. Again, the Harlem Renaissance connection. I was looking at, I was cursorily going through the internet, and I ran across Dr. Richard Long. He's a scholar. He was a scholar of the First Order. He was well versed in the connection between Harlem Renaissance and Haiti in a very interesting video. It's the University of Maryland at Baltimore. And he tells about the efforts of two extraordinary artists, Lois Mailou Jones and Katherine Dunham. And let me tell you what he says about these two women. Jones originally was from Boston, and she began her artistic studies at the age of 14, encouraged by her energetic and ambitious parents. She moved forward at that early age. She attained fame for her art while living as a Black expatriate in Paris during the 1930s and the 1940s. And Dr. Long states that even though she was very much in Paris and doing what the people do in Paris and learning all she could about art, he said the Haitian art, when she went to Haiti and lived in Haiti, that really, really defined her. And she married a Haitian while she was there. And anyway, and that's a little bit about her. It's so much about her because she is just everywhere, okay? And then there's Katherine Dunham, who revolutionized American dance. And she pretty much took whatever she learned from Haiti and tossed it out to the world. Pretty much that's all I want to say about that. Do you think Haitians are aware, again, of the strong impact of these two women's worldly contribution to art and dance as part of a cultural experience?
I think I personally know Katherine Dunham of name. Ms. Jones, I do not quite recall in terms of paintings, but I can understand and see that. It's your examples are quite poignant, to say the least, Dr. Cheney, because in the Haitian culture, paintings and dance are one of the most prized cultural possession. Of course, you have a lot of Haitian writers that write absolutely beautiful books in any language, French or English. But one of our most well-known artistic, let's say, manifestation is mostly in paintings that are kind of naive and surrealist type of paintings that are kind of out of this world because and very much inspired by Haitian ancestry, which was in Africa. So you will sometimes see paintings with giraffes and lions, and you're like, there's no giraffes and lions in the Caribbean. Why? Yeah, that is the imagery, right? That plays very vividly in artists' mind. Haitian paintings are extremely loud in the sense that they evoke an emotion either of daily life of people, but always with a tinge of surrealism that forces you to go in depth. There's always also a knack of a voodoo symbolism, to say the least. That is also very important. And only if you know what voodoo is and you know what the symbolism represent and who they represent and what they represent, are you able to interpret the painting the way it is meant to show. So here you have a canvas that is a daily life, let's say, of of the market. Usually it is mostly women that go to the market. There are the wives of the farmers that go and sell whatever produce or agricultural goods supplies in the market. But you also have paintings of figurines, woman figurines with very often a voodoo symbol that really illustrates something much deeper, or a surrealist environment that has some African nature towards it. But yet we're not in Africa, right? We're in the midst of the Caribbean.
What,
and that
what is
showcases
voodoo?
Voodoo is a religion. It's a religion that is practiced by many countries, including Haiti, which is a mix of native, let's say, native, the word is native spirituality, meaning Native American spirituality, and also mostly African ancestry spirituality. So it combines actually two very segments that exist in every religion, of the good and the bad. And it comes from a Native American ancestry because like the African ancestry, we believe in the powers of the universe on different levels. So you have the god of water, you have the god of the sun, you have different gods. It's a multi-deity religion where you invoke a certain god according to what the god is protecting or what the god is overseeing in, let's say, the terrestrial field or world. There's also two types of priests and priestess in voodoo. There are ceremonies held where there are sacrifices. And this is a religion that is practiced by the majority of people in the country. Of course, due to colonization, Haitian is majority Christian. However, side by side with the formal Christianity lays voodoo, which is a very national and well-known and well-practiced religion among, let's say, a good 70 to 90% of the population.
So, you know, Hollywood, they have their own depiction of certain things. And when they depict voodoo, there's always, you know, a doll and someone's poking it and then the person's feeling it. Where does all that come from?
Voodoo. Well, that is a very, let's say, naive way of seeing things. I understand for the purpose of Hollywood, we have to keep it interesting, so to speak. I cannot relate to the veracity of it, but I can tell you simply that, yes, voodoo is a religion, like every religion, even Christianity. You can use it for good or for bad, depending on where your intentions are, right? This is part of human nature, period. Now, once you understand that a certain level of witchcraft can have negative impact on people, just like, you know, back in the 1600s, the witches were hanged in Europe. You can understand how the depiction between the voodoo and the doll, and the voodoo that has its, you know, spiritual ceremony and sacrifices with, and it's not human sacrifice, just to put things in context, it is mostly, you know, animal sacrifices, and cherish the gods of water, the gods of the sun, the god of the mountain, kind of hinging a little bit of, you know, the Native Indian or Native American kind of spirituality, side by side the African, or should I say West African, more particularly spirituality. So it's a combination, a mix of the two. And you also have a certain a level of Christianity that comes and intertwines it. So, I mean, Cuba has it, Brazil has it, they call it the Santa Maria, so to speak. We have what we call a white Marie and the Black Marie, all right, which is the Santeria. It is a religion that really understand the intricacies of not only spirituality, but the gods that overlook our terrestrial habitat for now, so to speak, without being too,
Right.
too spiritual out of it.
Dr. Cheney, did you have another one?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Oh, and I just wanted to say about the dance. Folklore dance actually comes from voodoo as well. It's a native dance that was developed mostly of African ancestry, and that is well thought within all spectrum of population. And I can understand that people are quite intrigued by the folklore in Haiti, and that folklore actually is replicated in different other countries in neighboring countries, such as Dominican Republic, such as Guadeloupe, Martinique, and Cuba as well. And you can see that same type of folklore when you go to Brazil, in certain part of Brazil, especially the northern part, where there was an important slave trade. So this actually comes from the African ancestry.
Okay.
Per se.
All right.
And took a very important role during the revolution of the independence.
Okay. John, I want you to chime in.
Well, let's jump forward. We've gotten a lot about Haiti's past and its cultural roots. Haiti today, and again, as Solange mentioned at the opening, the legal zone is often looking at issues of injustice. And you've mentioned injustice in regards to how international aid has played or not played, as it appears to be really the case, into the rebuilding of Haiti. Are there other issues of injustice that you would like to highlight that are particularly painful for the Haitian people at this time?
At this time, I think at this time, there are two very important issues. I think it's important to bring them to light, which is indeed the humanitarian crisis that we just spoke of, the earthquake, but it's also the role of foreign powers in the instability of the country. I don't know if you notice, Haiti has gone through a period of instability, has always gone through periods of instability, but most recently it's gone to a period of instability that is most acute and has not leveled down since. In July 2021, a sitting president was assassinated. The last time that happened is, like Dr. Cheney said, during the American invasion in 1938, where the US stayed actually 19 years in occupation in Haiti. This time around, there was no occupation, thank goodness, none to be called for, period. However, the, should I say, the blind eye that sometimes, and it's a give and take situation, right? It's either it's a blind eye to the powers, the sitting powers, and not intermingling into Haitian affairs, but accepting somewhat of a level of quote unquote corruption, or it's sometimes directing who should be sitting at the table to negotiate with superpowers such as the US and France, etc. So you have this dichotomy between I'm not listening or I'm not hearing what you have to say because you are an independent country and you do what you need to do, because again, we're going to be called at fault here. And at the same time, well, yes, but we do prefer who we speak to at the table and who can sit down and speak to us about Haiti. So you do have that double dialogue, so to speak, that is contributing to somewhat of the instability of the country, because Haiti since 1987, which is when the Duvalier regime got shot out, has not grown into a democratic state in a, let's say, at a calm speed. It has been extremely abrupt. It has been extremely difficult for the country to grasp itself. The interesting thing about Haiti is not like it's a country of Africa where it's plagued by tribes and ethnic apartments or apartheid or anything of that sort. No, it's really an internal fight for power that has plagued the country for a long time. And the idea of democracy entering the sphere in 1987, everybody would say it was about time, but at the same time, apparently it's not, because in 2022, we're still at the same, almost at the same state, right? With a sitting president assassinating, with a prime minister that is currently in power, that is in the midst of a pandemic, or whoever believes in a pandemic has to put together a council of elections to implement a board of election that is due back in February 7, 2023, because it's going to be literally more than 15 months since he will be in power. There has been constitutional crises, but mostly there has been a state of instability that fueled down to the regular citizens. You have to understand that the earthquake of 2010 actually triggered much more than we expected. We had multiple crises inside of the crisis. You had a governance crisis. You have first a humanitarian crisis. You have a governance crisis. You have a migration crisis. And I'll touch briefly upon that, because the fact that the capital city was literally, after the earthquake, put into shambles, the majority of it was put into shambles, forced a lot of Haitians to flee the country. And they left for mostly economic reasons, right? Many flee to Central and South America, some flee to Europe, and others flee to the United States. Hence, 12 years later, we're having the Dallas crisis border that we had a few months ago. So the impact and the ramifications have tremors way beyond the time of the earthquake, even though the earthquake itself has been the initiator of all those crises. So seeing this in an holistic way, the humanitarian crisis of the earthquake, or the lack of humanitarian management, not only of Haiti due to its lack of governance, but also of international aid and international powers, have actually fueled those crises.
Yeah, and just, John, I don't want to interrupt, but I want to bring this to light, because it seems as though with the more help, more issues come. There's this writer with the New York Times. This guy is Jake Johnston. He's a research associate for the Center of Economic and Policy Research here in Washington. He says there'll be a lot of calls for international intervention and sending troops, but it's important that we take a step back and see how international intervention has contributed to this situation.
Absolutely.
And then you have this protester, and they're protesting. So, correct. And then he goes on, there's already been billions of dollars spent on the so-called national building in Haiti. Mm-hmm. But he's saying that this just contributed to the erosion that we see now.
Correct.
So why? What's going on here?
So this is a typical, and I personally do agree with this analysis. I do think, as they say, why Haiti still repairs after $13 billion in foreign aid. That is quite true. The issue with that is that Western or US entities see democracy or development in a very short-term, quick fixes way. You have a project that is either 3-year of peer performance or 5-year peer performance, and it has to showcase a certain level of indicators at a certain time. And once it does, they're like, yeah, pat on the back. Thank you very much. Job well done. We can all pack our bags and leave. And those programs have been designed by people that are not in the country, that have not lived in the country, that don't know how it works, And the indicators that in paper do look feasible or pragmatic in reality are not. And very often we have a copy and paste success story that we're trying to sell to say that this program was successful and taxpayer dollars were used diligently when actually they weren't. And 3 years or 5 years after a project, once the project leaves, the project leaves, meaning the project is no longer being implemented. There's no sustainability out to how this actually speaks back to the local economy, how this actually speaks back to people's livelihoods. And the project is gone, meaning the people, the farmers that were working on that project where you told them to cultivate this particular produce, where that's not what the Haitian market actually purchases, is like just great. I had 5 years. They gave me a good stipend, or should I say a good revenue generating activity. But once the dollar funds are out, then I'm out of pocket. I need to find another activity to sustain myself. And so it's the idea of you teach the one how to fish, you don't give them the fish. And so this is the issue that has been going in Haiti for quite some time. And I have to say, Haitians are pretty, how do you say that, frustrated with the results or the impact of that international aid.
Now, one more question, John, I don't want to cut you off, but we're on this topic. How involved do you think the U.S. is with Haitian politics?
I cannot answer that question.
Because there's belief that the president, how do you say his name? Mr. Moise?
Moise. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it's a rumor, but there's some people who seem to believe that the U.S. was responsible for putting him in power, and the majority of Haitians did not want him there. Is there any truth to that?
There are rumors about it, and unfortunately, the data collected for the election kind of read it that way. Partly is because also Haitians have a reticence in voting. I have to cite the massacre of November 29, 1993, which is partially to explain that behavior. In 1993, through election, a broad election base, it's a day that is a very somber day in Haitian history, where one of our first, let's say, democratic election was marred in a full massacre, where people got killed left and right going through the polls. And that has created a certain level of lack of trust in institutions and government, and not wanting to be participating in election because they already feel that the election is rigged. Whoever is supposed to be president has already been selected by the powers above them. And so why go risk their lives in voting for somebody that barely cares about them or for them? So that read of behavior also has to be put into context of why there's a low turnout at time of election in Haiti. That is one thing. Was there stamp of approval of a president for Haiti? I think the United States, as the superpower in the region, has a stamp of approval of many of the leaders in different countries of the region. I'll keep it at that.
Go ahead, John.
I'm not sure that there's much to say after that when you get to injustices. I mean, if you can't pick your own leaders, what's there to say? There's the ultimate injustice. If you're sitting in a situation where you can't pick your leadership, there aren't mechanisms being made that take into account the local needs or how the local populace would most benefit by any kind of aid. I mean, there's just injustice after injustice going on there. And you would think
Correct.
Haiti is a relatively, again, small place. You would think that it should be a place and others could have reasonably easily helped. Yet here we are getting very firsthand information that just has not happened. And no doubt there are many factors, but I suspect there are all too many factors that come back to powerful interests here and other places that are pulling strings that are not to the interest of the local populace. And
yeah, I would concur with that statement.
Sophie has been quite laying that on the table. People continue to suffer there because they are not the first and foremost interest.
Wow.
I got a quick question. Is it okay?
Yeah.
Sophie,
Yes.
I want to ask you something. Where is Baby Doc now? Is he still around? And the other
Baby
thing I
Doc
want to...
has died.
Yeah.
Oh, he did die.
Yes, he died.
Okay. How,
He
when?
passed away. A few years
He was
ago.
a
He
former
died in
president of Haiti.
Switzerland, actually. Yes, he was the son, actually, of Papa Doc,
Yeah.
who took power in 1957. Stayed about 16 years, and followed by his son at the age of 18, who became president, Baby Doc,
Right.
who stayed until 1987 when he was escorted out.
Okay, and I want to ask you another question, because you are really a diplomat when you're responding to things. You have your reasons, I'm sure. Black Lives Matter, that movement here in the States. Remember how I talk about the Harlem Renaissance and the folk here are watching what goes on in Haiti? And it's probably vice versa, because you have intellectuals all over the place. What do you think that they might think if Black Lives Matter movement appeared in Haiti? You think it would be the same results, that you would just have, let's say, a minor earthquake, so to speak, and then you're right back to the status quo? Or do you think, as it appears to be here in the United States, it might be a little different now? I don't know.
The
I know you're diplomatic.
No, Dr. Cheney, I wouldn't say that. I think I try to be as objective as possible, while stating the truth, but also giving indicators of where the target is. I think I wouldn't make the same comparison between Black Lives Matter and Question Haiti. In Haiti, Black lives always mattered, but didn't matter to the rest of the world. And hence the reason why we're still in 2022, where we are. Black Lives Matter in Haiti translates, at least for me, in the respect of the regular citizen. And what I mean by that is that whoever in power, whoever administration, whoever government, whoever head of state, need to guarantee its population a certain level of security. It needs to guarantee its population a certain level of respect of its civil and political rights. It must guarantee its population a certain level of economic plan or economic growth. And without those, why am I part of a nation? Why am I a citizen if that bare minimum cannot be fulfilled? And
Right.
so if I look at Black Lives Matter, I look at it for Haiti and for Haitians in that way. My life as an individual, as a citizen of this country, matters because you, as my institutions, my government, whoever you happen to be, need to be able to guarantee me a certain level of security, a certain level of rights, political and civil, and a path to my economic subsistence, even growth. And if those three cannot align, and if you are, as institutions or administration, consecutively unable to fulfill that mission, then we have a problem.
Yeah, the other thing that I can't let you go without this, when I was there, it appeared to me Port-au-Prince, a lot of poverty in Port-au-Prince.
Mhm.
Then you go outside of Port-au-Prince. I mean, I was riding in BMWs with some of the people there. So I don't get it. Can you just share with us that they're kind of like two tiers, the rich and the poor? And how did the rich fare that are in Haiti? Are they doing okay? Of course. I answer my own
Now,
question.
now you really have to understand how Haiti was formed and the reason behind the way that Port-au-Prince is, the central part of Haiti, kind of. We call it the capital of Port-au-Prince,
Yeah.
and the rest we don't really know where, and that's not really fair or accurate, because actually, if you go outside of the capital, that's where you understand the country and you understand the people, right? Haiti is modeled back to a very French centralized government type of architecture, meaning that the powers reside in the capital city, and the capital city has powers over all other departments of the country. And so it has the political power, it has the economic power, it has the military power. So when that happens and the rest of the departments are not serviced, what occurs? People go and migrate to the capital city. And so after actually 1987, after Papa Doc, the Duvalier regime fell, Port-au-Prince has experienced a growth of internal migration of its population coming into the capital city, actually gorging the capital city with lack of infrastructure, people, raising houses without respecting urbanistic laws, which actually fuel the earthquake and hurricanes and flooding issues when we talk about natural disasters, right? That really put a grip into the capital city. Because the powers at hand did not recognize the need to diversify and to really have a decentralization process of the governance of the country. Port-au-Prince, the capital city, is focused on Port-au-Prince. It's not focused on Cape Haitian. It's not focused in Jeremy. It's not focused in Kai. It's not focused in Artibonite. It's focused in Port-au-Prince.
What about Montjoli?
Correct. Montjoli is part of the West Department, so it's kind of still situated in the same area, so to speak. But the investment in infrastructure, it is not being done outside of the capital city as normally a country should be doing. And so
they appear to be living well.
Well, most likely they are, right? And that happens very much in countries where you have a very stark inequality between the rich and the poor. And that is due to lack of development and lack of economic opportunities that are available to, let's say, the middle class and the poor. And so you do not have a middle class. You have the poor and you have the rich. And they are at opposite spectrum of reality, and thus they are at opposite spectrum of interest as well.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So, Sophie, do you speak Creole?
Yes, I do.
Awesome. To close this out, because we're going to push this out all across the globe, but we want to really target Haitians. So can you close us out telling all the Haitian audience, thank you for watching, and that we appreciate, because there's a lot of people from Haiti who has contributed to U.S. way of life. So we are very appreciative of the Haitians here in America. So can you close us out and just thank all the Haitians in your native tongue for watching and being supportive of the show?
Absolutely. Merci en pile tout moun, tout haïtien yo. Mwen très content nous là jodi an n'a suivi émission et puis m'espérer que nous écho et podcast Solon là Kon sa, an pil lot moun ki pa haïtien katande informasyon sa ki très important pour nous toutes, pas uniquement pour haïtiens, mais pour tout le monde. Merci.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Sophie, for coming on our show and educating us and talking about Haiti.
Nice meeting you, Dr. Salati, Dr. Cheney. Salon, a pleasure as always.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Dr. Cheney, thank you as always. And John Salati, thank you.
Bye.
Take care.
Thanks for watching our video. For experienced legal services in Washington, D.C., Alabama, and Washington State, visit our website at remaslaw.com or call us at 1-833-329-1799.
Wait a little bit longer, wait a little, we'll be coming around again, 'cause you know we're stronger than we were when you and I began. I don't know what's harder, holding on or letting go. I don't know if we oughta, know if we oughta, know I know. I don't know where I'm going, but I know it's gonna be good. I don't know where I'm going, but I know it's gonna be good.
The lessons taught in the adventures of Uncle Billy and Ross are lesson that adults learn late in life. Some never learn it. I will recommend every parent, every young person, every adult read this book. But more importantly, apply the lessons.